Okay, so welcome back. We have so far done factoring based on greatest common factor, right? And area models. Okay, so we're going to kick it up a step today with a what if question, right? Because so far, think about what our area models have looked like. What if I gave you an area that was 2x squared plus 7x plus 3? I don't have an area model for 3 pieces. Right? All of our area models have either been 2 or 4, and they're all going to end up that way. They're always an even number. Okay, so we need to have 4 terms to make this work, to make our area model work so that we can figure out the length and the width. Okay, so we need to split our middle term, right? This middle piece right here. We need to split that into 2 pieces, into 2 terms, right? Because we cannot split the first or the last ever, 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 ever. It just doesn't work that way. Okay, so we're always going to be looking at the middle term. So we have 3 possibilities that add up to 7x, right? 6x plus 1x. And again, addition order doesn't matter. So you could put x and 6 or 6 and 1, doesn't matter. 5 and 2, 5x and 2x, and 4x and 3x. Those are my 3 possibilities, okay? I could do all 3 of these to see what works and, if I can figure out a length and a width that works for these. But the problem with that is, again, that's a lot of work, especially if you have something that's got, way more than 3 possibilities, right? You could get something that has like 10 possibilities. I don't know about you. I don't want to check 10 possibilities to see what works. So we have a shortcut. Okay, so follow along. If you have to, pause, replay, or whatever, but follow along with the first one. Okay, so the way this works, okay, this is where your vocabulary comes in. The coefficients, right, that's the numbers in front of the variables, of the 2 terms that we split into must add up to get the original middle number. That's kind of a duh, right? That's kind of how we split this up, is what adds up to give us 7. So that's kind of a duh. They have to add up to give us that original middle number. And they also have to multiply to get the product of the first and the last term. Okay, so this is where it gets a little interesting. So I have 7x squared plus 7x plus 3. So the middle term, right, is 7x. So I know for a fact my sum must be 7, period. Okay, because the 2 numbers have to add up to give me 7, or this whole thing doesn't work at all. The product of my first and last. So again, we're looking at the coefficients. So that's my first term, and that's my last term. So my product, 2 times 3, is 6. Okay, so I need to come up with 2 numbers, 2 terms, that if you add them together, you get 7. And if you multiply them, product means multiply, you get 6. So what do the 2 coefficients have to be? So let's figure it out. So the 2 coefficients have to add to get 7. There's the duh. And again, and have to multiply to get 6. Okay, so the only one of my 3 possibilities that adds, they all add to give you 7, but that also multiplies to get you 6 is 6 times 1, right? Because 5 times 2 is 10, 4 times 3 is 12. That doesn't work. So we have to use this of the 3 possibilities. Okay, so let's go ahead and find the area, or not area, factor that like we did yesterday in the last lesson. So we have our area. 2x squared, 6x, x, and 3. We're going to factor that out just like we did before. You're going to find the GCF, right, of those first 2. Figure out what they have in commons to give us our width. So 2x squared and 6x has to be 2x. Okay, so now find the length that goes with that width to get us our area. That has to be x, and that has to be a positive 3. And then find the other piece of your width, just like we did before. that will actually work with this length, and it has to be 1. So our finished answer, our length and width, width is 2x plus 1, and our length is x plus 3. All right, so let's try a few more just to make sure you've got the steps, because I know once you get to this point where you have all 4 pieces, this is the same thing that we did before. We haven't done anything new. It's getting to that point by finding those 2 terms that we're really focusing on today. Okay. So 2x squared plus 7x plus 6. What is the middle coefficient? Okay, middle term, coefficients, just the number in front, right? We don't have to worry about the variables. 7. Okay. What is the product of the first and the last coefficients? So 2 times 6 is 12. Okay. So using that shortcut, what 2 numbers will get us a sum of 7, right? They have to add up to 7, and the product has to be 12. Okay, so write it out, because I know that my first term and my last term are not going to change. So that's going to be 2x squared in the front and 6 at the end. I need to know what my 2 terms are going to be that I'm going to split into. So what adds up to 7 and multiplies to 12? Should be 3 and 4. So I have successfully split my statement, my area, up into 4 pieces so that I can then use my area model to work backwards and find my length and width. If you have to, and there's nothing wrong with that, if you have to, write down all the pairs that give you a product of 12, right? There's nothing wrong with that. Go through your multiplication table, go through your memory, whatever you're going to do. So it has to be 1 and 12, 2 and 6, or 3 and 4. And those are it, because again, I can flip these around and it's still the same product, right? So of those 3, what has to add up to give you 7? Since that is the rule for this one, right? And it has to be 3 and 4. All right, same thing. Oh, forgot the plus. Same thing that we did on the last lesson. What is the GCF of those first 2 numbers? What does 2x squared and 3x, what do they share as far as what's in common? Well, 2 and 3, the highest common factor between 2 and 3 is just a 1, right? Because that's the only thing you can divide both of them by evenly. But they do share an x, right? This one's got 2 x's, because it's x squared. That one's got 1x. So you can just have a variable be your greatest common factor. That does happen. So we've got the width. What's the length that has to go with this? All right, so 1 times 2 is going to give me 2, and x times x is going to give me x squared. All right, and then 1x times 3 is going to give me 3x. Okay, and then again, what does the other piece of the width have to be to make this length work? Has to be a 2. So your finished answer for your width and your length is x plus 2 and 2x plus 3. All right, so let's try a couple more. Okay, so yeah, and I put a term on here, or a little warning on here. Your middle term is negative, okay? So that does change, not the rules, but it changes what happens, right? Because when you have a negative that you've multiplied, remember from your integer rules, one of the numbers that you're multiplying has to be negative, okay? And this is also going to make our product negative. So we're going to work through this one. So I have seen some teachers, and again, it's just to help you remember, kind of like an organizational tool. I have seen some teachers use what they call the diamond or the X method, where they put the product here, and they put the sum here, and then the 2 numbers they put here. You don't have to do this. You can also write it out, like what is your product and what is your sum. And then you put your 2 numbers. Again, any way that you need to keep this organized so that you can actually find, the numbers that you need for this. So in this case, my sum, right, is always going to be the middle number, has to be a -2. Your product, again, always has to be first times last. So 3, and that is a -5 or a -5. So your product is -15. Now, this may take a little bit longer to find your two numbers, again, because you have a product that is negative. I need to remind you of something. If you're looking for all the different ways that you can get -15, right? That's -1 times 15, but it's also -15 times +1. You have to include both possibilities when you're going through and trying to find what works. Okay. You've also got -3 and +5 and -5 and +3. I think that's it for -15. So you have to go through and check which one gives you the sum that you absolutely have to have in the middle of -2. So grab your calculators, make sure you're checking your signs, and make sure that you're actually getting the right sum and the right product. In this case, it should be -5 and 3. +3. There we go. And again, a lot of teachers use this as just an organizational tool, just so that you know what your two numbers that you have to write are. So my new problem and -5 is the last term. Remember, our first and our last terms never ever change. Just the middle one that has to get split into 2. Okay, so now we have our area all split and nicely set up. All right, so same deal. What is the GCF? Okay, so what does 3x squared and 3x have in common? Right, they both can be divided by 3, and they both have an x. Okay, so again, you have your width. Find your length. Length has to be x and 1. Right, and then what do you have to get as your other piece of your width for that length to go? Should be a -5. So you should get 3x minus 5 and x plus 1. Now, I know there's probably at least a couple of you that are asking about this what if statement. Okay, so what if? What if I wrote my new statement, and again, the order doesn't matter, as -5x plus 3x minus 5? Okay, we'll do that one too, because the order does not matter. You're going to get the same answer in the end. So 3x squared, -5x, positive 3x, -5, same deal. Find your GCF. Okay, so what do 3x squared and -5x have in common? We saw this on the last problem. I think it was the last one or the first one, where 3 and -5 don't have any coefficients in common, so it's just a 1, right? But they do share an x. Okay, so you have your width. What does your length have to be to get this to work? Well, that has to be 3 times 1, and x times x has to be 3x. And then that has to be a -5 because you're getting a -5x. And then again, what other piece of your width works to make this length works has to be +1. So you'd end up with x plus 1 for your width and 3x minus 5 for your length. So the order that you write those two middle pieces doesn't matter. It's the first and the last one that matter as far as the order. And you're going to get the same answer. It's okay to reverse your length and your width, right? Because length times width either way gives you area. Okay, so that is it for this second part of factoring. We have one more day where we kind of put it all together and start looking at some patterns.